Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a really great panel, and we're really excited for this discussion. So we're so excited that you're joining us today for MSL Talk Live. Oh, there's Mary. Hey, how's it going? We just got started. So you're perfect. You're on time. So we are going to be discussing today why is like oncology, why is it such a challenge to break into? And before we get started, we have our wonderful Tom, my co-host, and our guest panels that we want to introduce. And we just want to put out a quick, a statement that all of the opinions and discussion here are of our own. None of them are reflective of our employers or their companies. This is really meant to be a discussion of our personal experiences and just our own opinions. But Tom, is there anything you'd like to join in on?
Yeah, I'm excited. So I don't want to give anything away, but shameless plug. Mary and I did a podcast on this specific topic. So if you really want to check out, you have to do it after this, but there is some additional content on the MSL Talk podcast. Mary and I covered kind of the same thing, but we have an amazing discussion, amazing panel. So I'm really grateful for our guests, and I'm really grateful for Julie, and I'm grateful for all of you guys for joining us. So I think it's going to be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So why don't we have you guys go ahead and start introducing yourselves? Mary, do you want to go ahead and start first?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Mary. I am currently a senior medical science liaison at Immunogen, which is a small biotech company specializing in ADCs. I came from AstraZeneca, and that's where I broke into the MSL role. I was there for a year as oncology MSL, and then prior to that, I was in clinical practice with Julie actually. But I was an oncology pharmacist for 5 years, and now I was in pharmacy management for another 3-4 years before transitioning to industry.
Michelle, do you want to start next?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm Michelle Mudge-Riley. I am a physician by training. I do have some years of clinical experience as well, but I have about a decade of consulting experience with small and large pharma and biotech companies. And my most recent role right now is as senior medical science liaison for CTI Biopharma.
Thank you so much. And Richik?
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Richik Mukherjee. I am a senior medical science liaison for breast, GI, and gynecologic malignancies in Genentech. Prior to Genentech, I was in Sanofi for lung and skin cancer. That's where I first broke into the MSL role. And prior to that, I had a career in a small biotech company for scientific external innovation and also in oncology medical writing as a side gig. And I'm a PhD scientist by training, and I am based out of Richmond, Virginia. Thanks to Tom and Julie for sending this invitation to me. Happy to be here and contribute in any way I can. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, why don't we get started with you? And why don't we just kind of, set the, baseline a little bit? Oncology is kind of an exciting field, right? And so why do you think like oncology is so interesting? Why is it such a hot field for medical affairs?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, Julie. And again, I have to just, for the compliance sake, I have to give a disclaimer.
Yes.
All my views today are my own and not influenced, or they do not belong to my employer, Genentech. And I think oncology is very exciting because the risk and benefit associated with the clinical development in oncology. It is extremely fast,
Mhm.
and things change within not even months but days, and the industry needs to keep up with it. So that brings a lot of excitement. It brings intellectual stimulation as well as the risk associated with it. And that translates to the medical affairs as well. That's why it is very competitive to get into the oncology. But I'll actually open it up for discussion with the other panel members here.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with what Richik is saying. The landscape is changing so fast, and data comes out so fast. I mean, the guidelines, by the time the new guidelines updated, you have gazillion data that's out there already, and it needs to be updated again. And I think that's what makes oncology really exciting. And the fact that these drugs are these new treatments that are coming out are saving lives. It's not just, I think that's that's what makes oncology different from some of the other therapeutic areas, because a lot of these new treatment that's coming out, it's giving these patients another chance of life. So I think that's what makes it really exciting and really meaningful.
Right. It's the unmet need, right? And the opportunity for innovation. There's so much innovation in the oncology space. It's so fast, like you were saying, but also there are new things all the time. And with that comes a lot of just excitement. And remember, I mean, all about the patient, right? So the patients now have options where they may have had no options before. None. They may just be done with life, and this gives them a chance to have a second chance.
And I think a lot of what you guys are saying also extends into like why so many are interested into transitioning into oncology, either as a first career or moving to it as a TA from other fields. Like you guys said, it's the patient need is really high. The opportunities to extend a patient's life, improve the quality of life, even just by a few more months, few more years, is really meaningful. And I think making that kind of impact, people feel value in their career. They really, you know, can embrace the fact that they're adding to patient care daily. They're giving patients those opportunities. So I think all you guys are saying is right on point. I would like to kind of hear a little bit more on why you think oncology tends to be a little bit of a harder field to break into than some of the other TAs. It seems to be more specialized. What are your thoughts on it? Michelle, why don't we start with you this time? We'll go in reverse.
Yeah. Well, so oftentimes a specific expertise is needed. And I think that's what makes it a little bit harder to break into. It's also very scientific. So there's mechanism of action, and oftentimes taking that information, distilling it, and then being able to translate and communicate it. We can all do it, but I think there's just another level of challenge there versus some of the other fields.
Yeah, and I think in oncology too, you need to really be able to like talk to talk and walk to walk when you speak to these physicians. I mean, it's really important to know just the data about how you can apply it to patient and what it looks like in the real clinical setting. And I think that's where maybe some clinical practice experience may come into play, because it's really hard to just talk about the data without really knowing how it really impacts the patients. And that's a huge thing for these oncology patients, is knowing how that data translates into how you can apply it for the patient and into clinical practice.
Yeah, I would echo Michelle and Mary, but I would just like add two or one more perspective. So definitely, when people are looking for oncology MSLs, they are looking for previous experience in oncology. And as it gets more competitive, if the particular company is preparing for a particular launch, they want to not only hire with previous oncology experience, but a very specific tumor type experience. For example, hematology oncology is very much known to be a niche, and only people with heme experience are considered for the first time MSLs. Um, and it again depends on the territory, depends on what particular stage of the product life cycle. For example, if a product life cycle is late in the product life cycle, hiring managers would probably take risk in first-time MSLs or MSLs from other therapeutic areas. But if it's they are preparing to launch a new drug in a really busy territory, for example, the Chicagoland, or where I support the DC, Baltimore, Maryland area. So people, and they're all the important institutions are here, the comprehensive cancer centers. So that's where it gets really tricky, and hiring managers are really looking for somebody who knows the territory, who knows the stakeholders.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point too. Even between, I mean, Rashik said a really good point between heme and solid tumor, there's a huge difference. But even within heme and even within solid tumor, there's a huge difference between different tumor types. I mean, someone with lung experience, what they know may be vastly different from like breast or GU or GI. And I think that's a huge key too in breaking into oncology, is really knowing you really have to know your tumor type and not just like a very broad term. Like you have to know the data inside and out for each tumor type.
But there's also the relationship building, and that is such an important component of being an MSL. And Richik, you touched on that a little bit, but I think that's also really important in the oncology niche is these oncologists, these hemonc doctors, I'm in hematology oncology, they're very close. It's a small world. And so having the relationships and also knowing who's in the field and being able to help with some of that peer-to-peer connection can be really helpful for these KOLs. And then also as an MSL, you're bringing a lot of value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you guys kind of hit on, three trifectas, right? One, having either a clinical background or scientific background where you can really, really, really speak to it, right? I think that's the first part, is being able to speak to that specialty and knowing the science so well and being able to talk to that specialty. And they're so different, right? But then, as you're mentioning, understanding the landscape, being connected, knowing how centers work, who to talk to, and then, as Michelle said, having those relationships. I mean, those are all really, really key components to any TAs. But I think because oncology is so specialized, and it can depend if they're a cancer center, if they're just an infusion center for a certain type, if they have transplant on the other. I mean, there's so many factors that come into play. So it really, really requires people to have like the scientific clinical background, as well as having a strong knowledge of like the working landscape, especially if you're trying to break in, right? You have to come strong with one of them to be an asset, especially if you're new as an MSL. Now, if you're coming over from another TA, you can have a good understanding of the landscape, maybe a good understanding of that hospital system, but then you have to still learn all the science for that TA, right? So I think, given we have like such a variety here of scientific background, clinical background, and just, industry background, how do you think your different backgrounds have helped you break into oncology? And like, what would you advise, other people when they're trying to highlight their own strengths? Like, what would be a good way to highlight their different strengths? And we have such a great panel here, so it's so fantastic because you guys have different experiences. So I'd love to kind of hear how you think your background helped you break in. Mary, we'll start with you since we started the other two first last time.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I did practice as an oncology pharmacist for almost 5 years, and I think that's what really helped me get into my first role, is just having that clinical experience and knowing, or showcasing that you're able to speak to these physicians, that you've actually worked with them in the field, and you know what it's like to have direct patient care experience, to work with these physicians, these nurses, the multidisciplinary team. Just having that in your back pocket, I think, really helped me get into my first role, because I'm not just speaking purely to the data, but I know how to apply it in a real clinical setting. And I think that's so I think for anyone who's coming from clinical practice, that's really something that you need to highlight, that you not only know the landscape and know the data, but you know how to apply it in real life.
Richik, I'd love to hear from you, since you come from a scientific background and you didn't maybe quite have the same kind of clinical background, but you have a wealth of experience as well to bring in. So what do you think what was your part of your background and training that was able to lend you into oncology?
My path has been a little unconventional because I did not have any clinical background. My PhD was also not in, it's not like I worked in a medical school for my PhD. So my PhD did have relation to cancer biology, but it was not like I was working with patient samples. So I had to take multiple stepping stones. And I took them very strategically. So my first stepping stone, I got a research internship in a big pharmaceutical company in Biogen in Cambridge. And I did it in the last year of my PhD. After my PhD, I joined a small biotech company in a customer-facing role in external scientific innovation. So where I got that industry experience and also customer experience working in preclinical studies, phase 1 study planning. And side by side, I wanted to have more in-depth disease area knowledge. So I started working as an oncology medical writer in the weekends for medical communications agency. And that's where I really had to read about the clinical trials, clinical manuscripts in solid tumors and heme. And with all that, when I first applied for multiple companies, I remember Sanofi, I'm very grateful for the hiring managers there. They took a chance on me, but I also had to show them that I'm prepared for it because I was located in Massachusetts when I was interviewing. And my position, what I was interviewing for, was in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So I had to come up with like a really draft territory plan and stakeholder mapping list, as well as how I will navigate the COVID-19 landscape because that was 2020 when I was applying. So they looked at my preparedness, my previous industry experience, as well as medical writing experience when they hired me. So multiple factors come into play, but I needed to take this route because I did not come from a Pharm.D or MD background.
But I love your experience because I think there are several probably listeners or several people out there who are in the same boat, right? They're like, I don't have the clinical experience. I want to break into tea where I can have impact and really help others. There are different ways to get there. There's not always one path. And I think, like yourself, you had to build that path, right? But getting that experience somehow, whether as a writer or breaking in a customer facing a position, gave you a blend of two different experiences and then just prepping yourself, right? So I think it's what we always say: if you want the job, you have to walk the walk, you have to talk the talk before you even get the role, and that requires so much preparation and time. And sorry, this is a side tangent. We have so many people who ask us for help all the time on breaking in, and they're like, "Well, how long does it take to break in? Like 6 months, 9 months?" And like people who have tried for a year and a half, 2 years, have changed their careers to get to these steps. So if you want it, you have to go for it. You have to build it for you. If you don't have the experience, find it. I always say this: if you don't have the experience, create the experience for yourself. There is no reason why you cannot find that path. It's not going to be a quick jump over though. And everyone thinks that it is. It is very challenging for a lot of us to. I think very few of us broke in with our first application. Those are the few success stories that we hear about, but the majority of us had to try for many different routes and many different years, and we had Excels of all the companies we applied to and never heard back from. So it's very common. I don't want people to feel discouraged. I want people to feel empowered from hearing all these different stories. So, Michelle, I'm going to go to you, and I love because your background is also very different. So I'd love to hear from your background as well.
Yeah. Well, and I love that hard work and really being focused on your goal is so important as you're trying to break into being an MSL. The other thing is, and I hear from people all the time, and I get questions from people with a variety of different backgrounds, MD, DEO, PhD, Pharm.D, nurses. And I feel like it doesn't really matter what you've done before. Your background, having that strong scientific base is really important. But the important thing here is learning how to speak the language. So if you want to get into oncology, what's the language? You have the guidelines, you have the different medications, you have the different tumor types. Make sure that you can speak the language of the hiring manager or the recruiter and especially the company that you're interested in. What are their medications? What's their pipeline? What are their mechanisms of action? What are their disease states? What's coming? What's approved? Look at different clinical trials. Where are they in the pipeline for these different medications? That will, first of all, help you be very confident in your interview because you are able to have a discussion with them. But second of all, it shows that you did your homework. It shows that you can understand these different things that are important to the company. And at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're adding value. You're showing them the value you can bring by working for them. That's why they would want to hire you.
So I'm going to bring Tom into this really quick because Tom, you have obviously a wealth of people always asking you for how can I break into this and that. What are your thoughts on this to jump in on? Why is it hard to break in oncology, and what are the transferable skills that people can really highlight to get them an opportunity to break into oncology?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you guys are doing an amazing job. So I don't want to repeat what you guys have said, but the one thing that's really important is oncology wants oncology. So if there's an oncology position that's posted don't apply unless you have specific oncology experience, because you're just going to be disappointed because they're not going to get back to you. Um, so that's number one. Number two, there's a lot of questions in the chat about how do I break in and what skills do I need, and I have this, clinical experience. Well, that's all great, but the way you're going to really stand out is not just by having oncology clinical experience, but it's your ability to show that you can create a relationship with the person that's interviewing you. Don't take that for granted. That's really, really important. How are you going to stand out in an interview? Well, it depends on how well you connect with the people that are interviewing you. Because if you can show that you could create a relationship with that person, it's going to show that you can do your job as an MSL. Because what do MSLs do? Create relationships. Yeah, it's important that you understand the science and you can get trained on the science. But if you can't be successful, if you don't have communication skills, if you can't present, if you don't have people skills, and if you can't be successful in creating relationships, you will struggle not only to get through the interview process and get the job, but to be successful as an MSL.
Agreed. I think that's something that's always really challenging, right? Is you can learn all the science, but learning that EQ is really, really, really important. And I think if you don't have the opportunity in your current career, we've said this on so many talks before, create it for yourself, find it for yourself, create groups, create journal clubs, lead, and practice. Practice presenting, practice talking to others, because that's going to be your job. So if you want to do it, start doing it now. So I want to kind of get into a little bit, and I think we touched about this a little bit already, but what are some of the unique challenges of being in the oncology field? And then what tips would you have for others, like as they're breaking into their first year in oncology, what tips do you have for them? How can they face those challenges in the first year? How can they make the most as they're transitioning into that career?
I can go ahead first, Julie, if that's okay.
Yes.
I think I would like to mention two unique challenges which comes with oncology. So as Mary mentioned previously, the guidelines are being updated so fast. So we see a major congress happening, some data come out, and the guidelines are already updated. And there are so many guidelines, right? So there is NCCN, and there are so many tumor type specific guidelines. So everything is updated. And there is also ASCO guidelines. So keeping up with the data, keeping up with the landscape, and if you are covering multiple tumor types, therapeutic areas, you have to keep updated with all of it. So that's a challenge, intellectual challenge. And the second challenge comes with the risk associated with oncology drug development. Programs fail and succeed in the matter of the months or sometimes years. So you have to you have to accept the fact that if your program shuts down, there might be a time that you have to look for another jobs, or you might need to change to another position within the same company. So you have to be very adaptable. So that is also another challenge, and but at the end of the day, what we all do what is best for the patient. So we accept the risks and we go forward with it. And I think in terms of your second question, what tips you have, can I clarify, are you asking tips what I have for who are already MSLs or trying to break into oncology?
Both. I mean, people maybe who just landed their first role, they're a couple months in, they're about to get on the field. What tips do you have to make the most out of your first year? Or what are things that you wish maybe someone had told you your first 2 years that you're trying to break into the field and establish yourself?
I think the first year is all about learning and just trying to be good at your day job. If you have other career development plans, like let's see, if you want to be some kind of director position after a certain number of years in the MSL field, the first year is not about that. First year about how you can really be good at your job, develop relationships, develop your KOL network, try to engage with as many KOLs as you can, also provide value. And in terms of people really gave me good advice. When I first became MSL, I was connected to great mentors. And one of the best advice I received from the senior director of my previous employer, previous company, that when you start, don't try to take it very fast. Try to take it slow, and then the job will speed up for you. I did made some mistakes in the first few months of MSL. I was trying to schedule as many KOL meetings as possible, but that was not the good thing. I realized very soon. So learning, we always learn on the job. So with every KOL meeting, we get better. So when you are making mistakes with many meetings, that's not good. So make mistakes maybe one in two meetings and then good at the next 20 meetings. So that was the best piece of advice I can give anybody.
I love that. Taking that minute to like self-reflect and then improve before you jump into your next one. Because if you stack everything, you don't have that time to take a minute to say like, what did I need to fix? How can I do this better? Because you're prepping so hard for your next meeting already. So yeah, I love that. A minute to reflect and self-improve. I'd love to hear from the other two.
I think so. The thing I would say is that, when you come to oncology, and this may be different therapeutic areas, but you may realize that oncologists actually really do want to talk to MSLs because oncologists want to stay at the top of the game, at the top of the data, and they know that you bring the latest data to them. But the challenge is because they're so willing to talk to you, you have to be able to grab their attention right away and be able to present something of value to them that they can apply it to practice. So they may be eager to set up the initial meeting with you, but if you don't make that connection with them and offer them value, you're going to lose them right away. So I think that is the advantage and disadvantage of being oncology is really being prepared when you go talk to these physicians because if you lose them that first time around, it's really hard to get them back. So again, like everyone has been saying, be prepared, know your data, know how to apply it in practice, and not just your own data, but you really need to know about the competitive landscape when you go talk to your physicians because it's inevitably going to come up in a conversation and you don't want to be caught off guard like oh like the physician should be like oh I heard about your drug but I heard about this data coming out from X, Y, and Z, and you don't want to be like I don't know what you're talking about because you're going to really lose them fast that way. So I think that is one of the main challenges of being oncology, and I think one of the ways that you can help stay yourself on top is like Richik said, just stay on top of the guidelines, stay on top of the data, and go to a lot of these oncology conferences, like the national conferences, regional conferences. Those really help a lot just to help yourself stay on top and to make a lot of connections too with your peers, with a lot of the physicians. That's where you make a lot of the connections. So I think conferences really, really help, especially now that most of them are live again. Having that face-to-face interaction will go a long way in helping you make your relationships. And then I think the other challenge with being oncology too is, again, I think just knowing how to apply that data to your patients. Like, you may be looking at a drug that has, say, like side effects like neutropenia or hair loss, and without knowing how that actually impacts a patient, you can't really speak to it. So you really need to know what that is like from the patient perspective as well to be able to really speak to it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, those are all great. You guys completely agree with both of you. I think to add into that, there's really a difference between community oncologists, academic, and even international KOLs, oncologists, hematologists. You have to approach them all differently because they care about different things. And so with the academic oncologist, for example, very interested in the innovation, the science. You have to know your data cold and be able to really have those discussions, those high level discussions with these academic physicians. Community physicians are also very smart, very accomplished, and very busy. So they're seeing a ton of patients every day. They're probably going over in their day with notes and patients. And so they're exhausted. They're seeing 40 different kinds of cancer. And so you're going to have one product, maybe two, maybe multiple disease states, maybe just one, but really being able to speak to them quick, effectively, as Mary was saying, give them that value so you don't lose them, so that then they know that, all right, it's worth me taking 10, 15, 20 minutes of my day, hopefully more, but you want to get a little bit of time with them. I think the other challenge in oncology is just this stuff isn't easy. And you do have to know your data really, really well. So keeping up with it, keeping up with those mechanism of action, the competitors, what they're doing, all of this stuff is constantly pulling at you, as well as the relationship building. But on the other hand, it's really fun. And I think that's the picture that we've provided today. And as far as guidance for anyone who's looking to break into the role or just looking to break into oncology in general, don't give up. Don't lose confidence in yourself. I think it's really easy to do because there's so much involved in trying to get into one of these roles. And even if you are in oncology, there's so much to juggle all the time and learn. And even your first year, as Richik was saying, it's all about learning, and there's a lot. So really just gratefulness to be in your role and learn as much as you can. Know everyone believes in you, and you can do it.
I think you guys all brought up amazing points. I want to circle back really quickly to something Mary said. And, I think this is something that's unique to oncology. And I noticed this because I come from cardiovascular. So in cardiovascular, a lot of, trials will come out, but the movement isn't made unless it gets into guidelines. So you can have great trials that produce and have data, and it'll take 2-3 years to get into guidelines. Or if you're unlucky and guidelines just published, you're waiting for the next update, hoping that your product will get into the guidelines. This is the opposite of oncology. Oncology, the guidelines publish, but the providers want the newest data because they have patients who need it still, right? They have patients who they already went through the guidelines and it's not working. And that's why you have that role. So I think this is like kind of an interesting nuance between the two, and why it's a hot topic, a fascinating area to get into, but why it is also challenging. Because we always say you have to stay on top of your data for all of us, for all the TAs, right? But oncology, you really have to, because that's specifically why they're coming to you. They want to know that latest data, and they want you to be able to, do not necessarily compare against competitors, but understand the landscape so you can explain where yours is going to benefit certain patient types. So I think it's just interesting because I come from a different world where we're always waiting for the guidelines to update and hoping to get in there. And oncology, it's almost like the wild, wild west. They want to hear it before it gets into the guidelines. So I think it's an exciting and amazing field. We are getting close on time, so I'd love to hear any last minute tips or advice from you guys. And then for our listeners, please, if you have questions, you have specific things you want to ask us, throw them into the panel. We'll start going through the questions soon. So please put them in. Don't be shy. But any last minute tips, advice for people interested in oncology, anything else you want to share at this point? I feel like you guys have just been a wealth of resources and information so far. So whoever like to open?
I'm going to jump in right now and just say, Tom, I appreciate your advice as far as don't apply if you don't have an oncology background. But I know several people who didn't have an oncology background who wanted to get into the oncology MSL role, and they were able to by just, again, being able to speak the language and taking their experiences and applying them to that MSL role. And it worked out for them. So I would say, again, don't give up hope if you really want to get into oncology, but you're not in that field now.
I can go ahead. I'll echo Michelle's thought. So number one, network with as many MSLs, senior MSLs, MSL directors you can. Build the connection so you can get internal referrals. Number two would be know the language, as Michelle said. And by knowing the language, I remember I used to go through grand rounds, virtual grand rounds of multiple universities which were open to public during the COVID time. And I used to really closely follow the physicians presenting the data. I used to go to ASCO's website and just really write down their scripts, like how they present the
Mhm.
data, how they speak the language. That really helped me. And number three, never give up, because cancer never does.
I love that.
Such great advice. Yeah, and I would say, they say name dropping is never a good thing, but I think when you're going through interview process, if you work at a major
Mhm.
institution, if you're working at a cancer center, if you're working at a major IDN and you know some of the oncologists there, name drop those names and just, like if you can say that you've worked with them, that you've had experience with these
Right.
physicians, I would totally highlight that in your interview process
Yeah.
because that's what gets you in the door.
Yeah. I agree. I think you guys all have said amazing advice, and I think it's all very, very true. And I think just different examples of ways to break in. The challenges of oncology are definitely there, but I think if you really truly want to get into it, you can, and you have to persevere, and it's not going to be overnight. You have to build your experience. You have to build your ability to talk the language. I love like all the experiences you guys shared. It's amazing because I think that's going to really inspire others to say, I have to put in the time, I have to put in the hard work to learn it, speak it, and be able to act on this part. So we had a couple questions, I think, in the panel. A couple people were asking, again, mostly, let's see, they had oncology experience in case review, upskilling. Okay, so there's this wasn't a specific ask, but they've done oncology certification programs. Any thoughts on that? Getting additional oncology certification programs? Do you feel it's beneficial? I know for pharmacists we have like the BCOP, right? So do you feel that getting these additional certifications are beneficial or gives you a leg up over other, candidates?
I guess I can speak to that since I have a B cup,
Anyway,
but
I kind of set that one up for you.
I need it. So I don't think it's necessary when you're in the role or if you're already at MSL, it's not as important. But if you're still in clinical practice and you want to break in, I think having that B cup really helps you stand out from other candidates who may not have because it's a one level up and it requires a lot more studying. You have to keep your certification up to date, so it does require a level of like it's just an extra level of going above and beyond, and I think that shows when people see that you have that BCOP certification.
I would say you can never go wrong getting an education, but don't spend all your time getting these different certifications and degrees. Really meeting people, networking with them, building those
Mhm.
relationships. That's ultimately probably what's going to get you the job.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think if it was something you're going to head towards anyways, and you need a little bit of motivation, it's not going to hurt you. But I agree. If you're going to spend a year trying to get a certification versus a year networking and trying to go to conferences and actually meet people, I would go network and meet people. So I think we had a specific ask looking at ASHP certifications to upskill. I'm not as familiar with the ASHP certifications. I don't. That's a specific pharmacy one. Are you guys as familiar with it? Yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't
we
heard
haven't.
one.
So that may answer your question because we haven't heard of them. So maybe not as significant. But if you're trying to get oncology experience, it may be more valuable to try to get like a side hustle, hands-on experience. Another way to get that hands-on oncology experience. Let's see. Okay, so there's a question on any particular advice how to prepare for a presentation and slides. So I'm going to trip this back to Tom's main podcast for MSL Talk. He has, I don't know now, 160 episodes. You tell me, Tom, how many episodes do you have now?
156.
156. I'm always close.
I think
156.
155 came out yesterday, but we
Okay,
recorded
155.
156.
Really
Yeah.
close.
So there's a lot of content out there.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, it's funny that you should ask that question. One of the most downloaded episodes and watched YouTube episodes is on presentation skills. So there's a couple of them out there. The one specifically, it's how to architect a presentation for an MSL interview, um, has gotten thousands and thousands of downloads on YouTube. That's one to definitely check out. It's really, really good. So I would steer you towards that because I just think that that's probably the best advice that I've seen out there. I think that there's probably a lot of articles and stuff that you could find, but that would be my advice.
Yeah, and I think if you like MSL Society, there's different resources online through LinkedIn. Find them. Keep doing your homework. If this is your first time listening on something, you're just scratching the surface. There's so much, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast, start combing through them. Start looking online for resources. Start connecting with people. There's a plethora of resources now. There was not years ago when we were all first trying to break in, and Tom was one of the first that really set a lot of us up to become MSLs, to give us the background and experience we need to talk the shop talk. So I would definitely check out what else there is out there. There's so many different articles and resources available. So I think, start with MSL Talk podcast. Someone else had recommended a guide used by, I'm going to butcher her name.
It's
Aoife.
Aoife O'Dwyer.
Yes, she
She's
has
an
done.
MSL consultant. She's
Yeah,
on the podcast too.
yes, and she has a website. She has amazing
Got
tips and
good
advice
stuff.
there also.
Yeah.
So there is so much out there, but please keep looking, keep researching. We're not going to go into specifics here because that would take a whole another 50 minutes and then some. But we appreciate the questions for Ask, but we're going to redirect you to where the resources are so you can listen to the full hour for it. But if there's no other questions, I'm going to thank our panel. And this is an amazing panel. I'm so glad we got everyone on today that we did. This is one of the talks that you probably want to listen to again if you're trying to break into, and maybe take some notes, and hopefully inspires you to find different ways to break in, because I don't think there's always one path in. So I just want to say thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you to our listeners who join us. And whether it's live or recorded, we really appreciate you guys listening in and joining us for these talks.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
guys,
much.
for having this resource. It's so great. I heard from a lot of my team that they listened to this and tried to listen to it before they broke into the MSL role. So, you guys, kudos to you.
Well, it's Tom who's come up with all of this to begin with. Tom, any closing words?
Well, the one thing people always ask, like this, you can also watch this again. So this stays up on LinkedIn Live. That's why we used to be on Clubhouse.
Yes.
We switched from Clubhouse to LinkedIn because this will stay up. So you can watch it again. You can share it with your friends, and hopefully get a lot of value out of it. But I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you, Julie, as always, for doing such an amazing job in running this. Mary, Michelle, Richik, I really appreciate you guys for coming on. You're amazing. And the podcast and MSL Talk Live is successful because of all of the people like you that are so amazing and so smart, and I appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and we appreciate it. And we'll check out the comments again in case we missed any of them. Thank you so much, you guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.